Hello, I'm Pastor Josh, and this is the view from my chair. This morning it's been pretty quiet outside. I haven't even seen birds moving around. It's on mornings like this when I look out and see the contrast between the dead branches and the green leaves that I'm reminded to be grateful for all that God gives in life. But this morning we're going to be looking at James chapter 4, verses 4 through 10. A really fascinating passage here. Let me just talk you through the structure for this particular passage. The passage begins with what I refer to just as a prophetic rebuke. And that's James 4, 4 and 5. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? This is the strongest language that James uses in the midst of lots of strong language. But note carefully here that his strong rebuke, calling the people literally adulteresses, is followed by a equally strong word of comfort, but he gives greater grace. This comfort is rooted in a reference from the Proverbs there, and it serves as a strong contrast. The depths of our sin only reveals even further the depths of God's grace. But James, in his typical fashion, isn't content just to provide a rebuke and then comfort. He's going to call the people to action. And he does so with three different paradigms or pictures of how they are to respond. Note the imperatives here. First, submit to God, resist the devil. This is the first paradigm for what it means to respond to God's grace to the humble. This language of submission is the language that God establishes for all humanity under him. It's also the language for humans to use with respect to human government, and also the language that's used with respect for husbands and wives. This is the ordering of human relationships. In the Old Testament, though, this paradigm is the paradigm of the king. The king is to submit to God, and as the king submits to God, he is victorious over the enemies of God. Those enemies here listed as the devil. That's not the only paradigm that James calls the Christians to. The second one shows up here in verse 8. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And then with some strong language, cleanse your hands, purify your hearts. Verse 8 is the language of priests. The priests were the ones who would draw near to God in the tabernacle. They were required to wash and to purify themselves every time they came into the tabernacle. And so James picks up that Old Testament paradigm of the priest and applies it to the Christians. You Christians are to, as priests, draw near to God, cleansed and purified, and with the comfort knowing that he will draw near to you. But then lastly, in verse 9, he gives a third and final paradigm. He uses the language of the prophets who called the people to be miserable, to mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. This is the kind of thing that the prophets would talk about. And so he, like a prophet himself, calls the people to act like the prophets who would act out a kind of passionate, prophetic response to God. And so these three paradigms, king, priest, and prophet, which are key paradigms from the Old Testament, James picks up and applies here to the Christians. He says to the Christians, you are to act like the king, you are to act like the priest, you are to act like the prophets. And this is what it looks like to humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you. This becomes the powerful call for all Christians in how it is that we are to live. Now, let me just make one additional point. There's lots to say about this passage, but let me make one additional point. Verse 5 is arguably the most difficult verse in the New Testament to translate. And it shows up in the wide range of different translations that show up in English. Let me just show you my survey here of the different English translations. I'll put this in the comments in case you're interested. You'll see there's 4 different primary options of how to translate verse 5. I won't read through all of them here, but I just want you to note 18 use this first translation. There's 16 that pick up this second version of it, 9 the third, and 19 this fourth one. I'm using the Christian Standard Bible, and so that translation will be the one that I'll reference for Sunday morning. But pay attention to this, because you're going to see that your people will likely come with different translations of this particular verse and with their questions. But you can basically see that the issue here is some ambiguity in the actual Greek text. The word spirit could be a human spirit, or it could be God's Holy Spirit. The subject of the verb could be the Spirit, either human or the Holy Spirit, or it could be God, who is the subject of the verb. And so this is a difficult one, likely not going to find any agreement even in the scholars that you will survey in this. I think all in all, the context of James points towards the option number 1, which is the one that I would use. So as you go out this week and as you prepare to teach, remember you are serving as king and priest and prophet to God's people, even as you teach them. And so do it with great courage, but also with great humility. And may God bless you.